Wow, can you believe the 2020s are just about halfway over? Hopefully, revisiting the 26 full Magic sets released in that time can assuage a little bit of the anxiety triggered from knowing that, but I can't make any promises. So yeah, it's not exactly the best time to be a Wizards of the Coast consumer right now, but one respect to which I'm mostly happy about is their approach to limited set design. They've been fine-tuning their approach with every new expansion, and by now it's easy to take for granted. So I wanted to add to the conversation by talking about every Magic set from the first half of the 2020s, from Theros Beyond Death all the way to Foundations. The triumphs, the missteps, everything in between, and specifically how they all got to be that way. I won't claim to be the best Magic Limited player ever, but it is the form of the game I'm most invested in, and I definitely consider myself an experienced player. I've hit Mythic more than once, and I've drafted most of these sets at least 10 or so times, some of them way more than that, but some of them less, especially the physical-only ones. So yeah, I might be off base about some things, so feel free to ring in the comment section. And before we get started, I'll go over my scoring system, which will be on screen for every entry. Each set will get 2 scores out of 10, one for mechanics and one for flavor. For mechanics, attention is given to uniqueness, color/archetype balance, depth of synergy, and a whole host of other things I'll address when talking about specific sets. For flavor, I mean art direction, story, general cool factor, or vibe. Total score out of 30 is just mechanics times 2 plus flavor times 1. And also a few miscellaneous things. First, this list is only covering original, draftable sets. So things like master sets, remasters, the digital-only version of Baldur's Gate, commander sets, and March of the Machine Aftermath don't count. Second, the gameplay ratings are purely based on how the set plays in Limited, really specifically Draft. Constructed formats do not affect the score whatsoever. Third, I might sound kind of negative when talking about some of these, but with maybe the exception of the bottom 3, I think all of them are worth drafting at least once. A lot of the problems only reveal themselves after drafting for a while. That said, I stand by my criticism because there's a big difference between a set that gets worse the more you play it and one that gets better the more you play it. And with all that out of the way, let me get to ranking every set of this decade so far. Or every set except Modern Horizons 2, which is the only one I have never played. Feel free to talk about it in the comments, or just pretend it's one space above your most overrated set and one space below your most underrated set, okay? Okay. Number 26, Murders at Karlov Manor. I really try to find something to like about each of these sets, but I just can't with this one. It's basically a complete dumpster fire. The archetypes are both overbearing and boring, and I can't think of a single card I'm actually excited to play. In some ways, it was kind of doomed from the start. Murder mystery is way too narrow a concept to carry a whole set, and creating the feeling of solving a mystery within a game of Magic was always going to be next to impossible. I guess they kind of tried with the disguise mechanic, but the format is so nauseatingly fast that no one will flip their creatures. Suspect makes this problem even worse. Blocking is just not an option so much of the time. It's just a game of play cheap creatures that are impossible to interact with and then slam them into your opponent. On top of that, collect evidence is boring and flavorless, cases are kinda cool on paper, but again, you'll basically never have time to solve them. And I don't even want to get started on the flavor, but I guess I have to. There might be a handful of cute nods to classic mystery tropes, but all in all, it's the Planet of Hats in its purest and most literal form. Everyone is a detective in a leather coat and a fedora, from the sphinxes to the gargoyles to the elemental slime monsters, and we hardly understand which cases they're even trying to solve. The one-note focus on detectives is even more egregious when this set is supposed to be on Ravnica, an otherwise well-textured world that people really like. If anything, it at least highlights how far Wizards has leaned into this kind of shallow, tropey world-building lately, and how much of a step back it is from what their settings could be at their best. Otherwise, the only real murder victim is this set. Next. Number 25, Innistrad Crimson Vow. We really didn't need to spend 2 sets in a row on Innistrad, especially when this one basically did away with everything cool about Midnight Hunt. Like, the last set had a cool story with the Eternal Night, now it's barely recognized and then just gone. The last set had a flavorful zombie mechanic and a decently fun build-around with Coven. Those are gone too. Even Flashback is gone. Instead, we got Cleave, which gave us some good memes, but is otherwise just worse kicker. I guess the colors are a little more balanced than in Midnight Hunt, but it's stuffed with so many unbeatable rares that tons of games are decided before they've even began. Beyond that, most of the mechanics and archetypes are just forgettable. The Golgari Big Butt deck is kind of fun if you can get the right uncommons, but that's a big if, so really it's just best to avoid this thing. Number 24, Core Set 2021. Literally, who cares about core sets? I guess some people miss them, I don't. Forgettable mechanics, generic flavor, no effort to stand out. Let's move on. Number 23, Phyrexia All Will Be One. This set is near the bottom of my list for one singular reason. It is just too fast. I don't like spending money on games that last 5 turns, and it's especially bad when you've got mechanics like Proliferate that are supposed to reward slow, grindy gameplay but just get overrun instantly. Now, the flavor is pretty damn good, and the story effectively gives off a sense of dread, though I have to say some of the art is a little sanitized compared to the Plane's last appearance. Some of it, like Crawling Chorus, goes hard, but look at some others and you can tell they aren't willing to go quite as far with the mechanical body horror as they used to. And in retrospect, it might have been a good idea to start showing the Phyrexians spilling into other planes on more than one card and not save the entire invasion for just one set, but we'll get to the impact of that later. Number 22, Streets of New Capenna. This one hurts me because it was so close to being great. As soon as I heard the concept for this thing, I was immediately hyped out of my mind. A 3-color faction set in an Art Deco noir city built by angels and now run by demon crime lords? That's awesome. What a cool, original concept that can also lend itself well to color-based archetypes. But when it came out, it really dropped the ball on most things it seemed to promise. Let's start with the 3-color aspect. I liked how they tried to have some overlap between the factions in the form of 2-color archetypes, like how the Riveteers and Maestros both care about sacrificing in black-red, but those 2-color archetypes were just too strong, and they had the unfortunate effect of making 2-color decks more viable than 3-color ones a lot of the time. They almost had the right balance, but they didn't. And honestly, I think it's the fault of 3 overpowered 1 and 2 color commons. And what do you know, they're all in the Broker's colors, making that faction way too strong. God help you especially if you're in a bot draft on Arena where the Broker's colors aren't even checked in by higher demand. Just nothing but Jewel Thieves and Shield counters all the way down. Flavor-wise, I still think this set is above average. The art direction for the background environments is like maybe the best in any Magic set ever. But other than that, it still could have been so much more. New Capenna is supposed to be a city of grit and glamour, and we only got the glamour, no grit. The tone is weirdly light for what's supposed to be a world ruled by mafia lords. Speaking of those, they're supposed to be demons, and these are not demons. They're furries with horns. In general, this was not a world that needed a lot of animal people, but I guess Wizards decided to just go all in with those. There are also way too many angels. Even 2 of the OP commons I talked about are angels, which feels so off because they're supposed to have been long gone in the story. The angels only show up at the very end of the online story, and there's basically no clue as to what the ones we see on the cards are up to in this world. I think they could have worked as like corrupt cops, but the story claims there's no real law enforcement in the city at all. And if that's the case, what does it even mean to commit a crime? Overall, this set was disappointing, but that's because it needed more fleshing out and refining. And I do hope we come back to New Capenna eventually. If any world could get the Neon Dynasty treatment going forward, this one is it. Number 21, Innistrad Midnight Hunt. I'm honestly not sure whether this deserves to be ranked a little higher or even lower than it currently is. On the one hand, it's got some of the better set mechanics in recent memory. Decade is perfect for zombie tokens, Disturb is completely on flavor for spirits, Coven is fun to build around, and of course the all-stars of flashback and double-faced cards make their grand return. Plus, it's got a simple yet memorable story about an endless night causing werewolves to run rampant. On the other hand, yeah, there are some serious color balance issues. If you drafted Gruul werewolves, which are supposed to be the centerpiece of the set, prepare to be devoured by constantly resurrecting zombies. Yeah, Decade and Disturb are well-designed mechanics in a vacuum, but in the set's ecosystem, they make 2-for-1s way too easy. While transforming your werewolves is the opposite, they require a lot of legwork just to slightly buff your existing board. It doesn't really take a genius to tell me which deck is going to have the upper hand there. Number 20, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. I was so hyped when I heard there would be an official D&D Magic set. Like, I had no affinity for the Forgotten Realms, but I'm a big D&D player, and I was still excited for the broad D&D tropes. I thought the cards could just write themselves. And they kinda do. There are plenty of fun individual designs, like the creature lands and classes, but overall, I think the problems outweigh the successes. The ambitious dungeon mechanic didn't really pay off because the format is so fast and blue is so bad, and I'm also just not a huge fan of all the d20 rolls. Magic has enough randomness already. Adding in more just reduces player agency if you ask me, and flavor words will always and forever be completely pointless. Number 19, Dominaria United. It might shock some of you to see the set this slow, but I will say this is kind of the point at which the sets stop being bad and start being okay. Still, I bet lots of people are higher on this set than I am, but I have some major problems with it. Mainly, it's so focused on multicolor that way too many decks end up a similar variety of 4-color domain soup. And unlike some other sets like Neon Dynasty and even Ikoria that also had tons of dual lands, color pair synergy is mostly very weak, pushing players away from specialization while incentivizing splashing with domain. Again, this favors multicolor good stuff decks and not much else, and that leads to an annoying prevalence of a few powerful cards. Flavorfully, it's not bad, but nothing special either. It doesn't lean into Magic history as much as the last Dominaria set, and the concept of Phyrexian sleeper agents doesn't make it into the mechanics at all. As a positive, I did like how Blue-White managed to combine Go Wide and Spells Matter synergies, and Enlist is a solid mechanic that I wouldn't mind seeing again. It's even kind of a fix for banding? Finally, I guess. Number 18, Theros Beyond Death. Have you forgotten this set existed? Me too. Other than Thessa's Oracle, it doesn't seem to have left any real impact. Like, I hardly even remember Uro, despite the stranglehold he had on 60-card formats for a while. That said, as a limited set, it's definitely not bad. There's some cool art of the underworld, and graveyard recursion is always interesting to play around, though I feel like it shows up so often these days that it's not too special, kinda like this set. Number 17, Zendikar Rising. I still don't really get the hype around Zendikar as a plane. It's supposed to be the adventure world, but isn't that every Magic world? The party mechanic in particular is really leaning into the D&D inspiration, but that's kind of awkward when we got an actual D&D expansion just the next year. The actual unique parts of Zendikar, like the Royal and the Eldrazi, are in the back seat here. Mechanically, the set is firmly okay. It's mostly forgettable, but the main thing Zendikar has always had going for it is how it uses lands, and Rising is no exception. Drawing lands is always a feel-bad if you have nothing to spend the mana on, and that's a bigger problem now that competitor TCGs have found ways around that problem. But here we have not only landfall triggers, but double-faced lands that can serve other purposes if you don't need the mana. That stuff is great, and I hope it shows up in more sets going forward. Number 16, Wilds of Eldraine. I want to take a quick detour to say that I really love the first Throne of Eldraine. It missed eligibility by a few months, but if it didn't, it would have made my top 5. There was something so pure and genuinely adventurous to it, with flavor that perfectly tapped into the spirit of pastoral imagination. So many cards were the kind of thing where you could look at a crumbling old ruin and picture something just like it in the forest beyond the hill. And of course, the set gave us adventures and food, some of the best mechanics in recent memory. I even liked Adamant, and I think sets should still try monocolor payoffs here and there. So how much of this carries on to Wilds? Some of it? It's definitely balanced and perfectly playable, but in my opinion, it's a bit of a step down. Adventures are back, and they still work well. This time they're off-color to reward splashing, but unlike, say, Dominaria United, 2-color synergies are strong and fixing is limited, so the archetypes can stay intact. But still, the monocolor themes from Throne are very much gone. Instead, the big new mechanic is rolls, which are fine, but I feel could have been more distinctive. They aren't much different from a +1/+1 counter most of the time. And flavor-wise, Eldraine doesn't feel nearly as wondrous as it used to. There's way more of the psychedelic fairy world, but it's to the point of being overpowering. At least for me, without the human castles and cottages, the resonance is gone. Compare this Golgari signpost uncommon with this one, and it's night and day. Especially with the entire archetype for Evil Candy, I do think this set went a little too far in a few places. Number 15, Foundations. On some level, this is just another core set. It's not set on one specific plane, it doesn't feature any new mechanics, and it uses tried and true archetypes without adding anything unique. That said, it very much benefits from having been designed as not just a core set, but the core set. All of the most iconic strategies associated with each color are present and accounted for, along with many of the best role filler cards from earlier sets. Because of this, you won't find rigidly defined archetypes, and deck building is a lot more expressive and open-ended. With 10 dual lands as well, it's got a bit of the multicolor soup problem, but at least it doesn't actively encourage playing lots of colors like a certain other set. Flavor-wise, it's nothing special, but it's not as bland as past core sets either. It's nice to see so many classic reprints in one location, and Foundations also isn't afraid to show off the more unique corners of the Magic multiverse either. The word I'd use to describe most core sets is basic, but the word I'd use for Foundations is classic. It's a greatest hits CD for Magic, and while I wouldn't guess it's many people's favorite set, it's hard to argue it's not good. Number 14, Battle for Baldur's Gate. I'll keep this short, and I'm not totally confident about this ranking because for the physical set, which is probably the more important one, I only got around to playing it once. I wasn't a fan of the digital version, I'd rank it similarly to the first D&D set, but the paper one is definitely better. The dungeon mechanic is way better suited for Commander, and having a Commander draft at all is a huge novelty. I can't talk at length about it, but I had fun at my draft night, so I'll be nice to it here. If you have deeper thoughts on the set, well, the comments section is right there. Number 13, Kaldheim. I kind of go back and forth on this one, but now you've caught me on a good day. Kaldheim is a fairly slow and grindy format most of the time, but I definitely prefer that to a super fast one. And still, you've got Boast, which encourages aggression to some extent. The Snowlands almost add an entirely new color, which really shake things up, and Foretell is an excellent mechanic that keeps players guessing what they're up against. Yes, the plane is creatively overstuffed for one set, especially since it's less one world and more a miniature multiverse in its own right. I know they had to set up the Realmbreaker somehow, but there were other options. And yeah, the gods especially are a little too on the nose in their references to real Norse gods, but still, Norse mythology is cool, and seeing our first glimpse of the Phyrexian invasion was pretty hype. Number 12, Modern Horizons 3. This set is a lot. It's got every mechanic you remember and a ton you forgot about, and I won't claim to understand all the synergistic nuances. What I will say is that there is a ton of build-around potential, with recurring archetypes just tight enough to prevent players from getting completely lost in the sauce. Yes, Writhing Chrysalis can kiss my ass. It's a new Capenna Broker's Tier oppressive common, but it's still just one card out of many. Switching to flavor, the set gets a lot of mileage out of using old mechanics for new planes and factions, and there are plenty of cute references to classic cards. Still, I'm not big on the huge Eldrazi presence. A cosmic threat like Emrakul deserves some build-up. It shouldn't just be thrown into a set with non-existent story like this one. I'm sure it was a good marketing move, but still kind of annoying. Number 11, Unfinity. I'm glad unsets exist, and I hope they continue to get made. They're always a nice change of pace. It's fun to hear people throwing cards and counting trash cans around the game store, and it's fun to see the ridiculous combos some of the cards can enable. Mechanically, the set is very well thought out, with balanced and distinctive archetypes for each color pair. Sure, they might be a little on rails, but it's hard to complain about that with all the wacky mechanics that can swing games in ways that just aren't possible anywhere else. This also doesn't matter much, because it's not like many people will draft this set more than a few times. Still, there is one notable problem with the set. I think I even heard Morrow call it out sometime. He talked about how they try to have metaphorical glue linking mechanics together, sometimes a set has it, sometimes it doesn't. But the problem with Unfinity is not metaphorical glue, it's literal glue! The stickers come off way too easily, and they get lost. It doesn't matter if the cards are naked or sleeved. This happened to everyone using stickers at the drafts I went to. And that's a problem, because this is a physical-only expansion where individual stickers can be quite important. All in all though, fun set, even if it doesn't completely stick the landing. And neither did my joke, I know, let's move on. Number 10, Lord of the Rings. The first true Universes Beyond set, and a pretty good first impression. It definitely helps that Lord of the Rings is such a foundational work of fantasy, and thus fits right in with the classic MTG aesthetic. The set is hard to rate from a flavor standpoint, like if we were rating Middle-earth as a whole, it would be an obvious 10 out of 10, but here we're just rating the cards and how inspired I feel when looking at them. And by that metric, it still fares really well. The set has a very sincere adventurous spirit that echoes the source material and more than makes up for the lack of novelty it offers most players. I also like how it's visually distinct from the Peter Jackson movies. As amazing as those are, it's good to stand out. You have some of the characters looking slightly different, and plenty of things that were only in the books, like the Scouring of the Shire. Mechanically, the set is solid, but that's where it stays. I can't think of any balance issues or actively unfun mechanics. but there aren't any mechanics or archetypes that really stand out in a good way either. It definitely has core set vibes if you know what I mean. But that, combined with the recognizable setting, means that this is definitely a good set to get people into Magic, and that shouldn't be undervalued either. Number 9, Ikoria. Am I weird for thinking this set is underrated? If we are only talking about limited, companions are super dynamic, and if you pull one, you know you'll be in for a special draft. Keyword counters are also an inspired new mechanic, and so is Mutate, which they managed to make viable due to triggered effects for value and somewhat tempered removal. The light 3-color support also adds plenty of dimension, and the cycling archetype is a lot of fun, though maybe a little too powerful. The art direction for this set is also awesome. Every triome and monster breed looks distinct. It's far from the most deeply developed world out there, especially when it comes to human society, but just the images and the snippets of flavor text of the 3 major cities are enough for me to imagine what it might be like to live there. If you ask me, that's a really solid testament to Ikoria's artistic achievement in a very limited medium. Pun intended! Number 8, Bloomburrow. Yeah, how could you not like this set? It's got cute animals, which is always a recipe for success, but it's got cute animals in the most alive-seeming original world WotC's created in a long time. I can picture what life might be like for each of these animal species, the camaraderie of the valley and the shadow of titanic elemental beasts. Now that I think about it, that's kind of Ikoria again, but a little more unique and better executed. Each species is also well-defined mechanically, though the archetypes are kind of on rails as to be expected from creature-type focused sets. If you've drafted a given color pair once, you probably get the gist of how it works. That's not necessarily a bad thing though, and it makes for a great introductory set, and a really nice low-stress, good vibes format for more experienced players. Number 7, Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Okay, put your 6-shooter away, I think this set is really good. No, not the flavor, of course not. It's a literal planet of hats, and it also goes way off the deep end when it comes to interplanar crossover. After getting just a taste of the Omen Paths in the last few sets, this one gives us a pile of random characters from around the multiverse trying to steal Baby Yoda from a vault or something. It's barely developed and really dumb. The hodgepodge of extraplanar characters makes the Western angle feel so artificial too. Like, these characters came from such different cultures and worlds. Why are they dressed as cowboys? It's like they're literally just cosplaying as cowboys instead of the world organically becoming like this. But anyway, from a mechanical perspective, this is great. Just a treasure trove of potential value engines that involve chaining cards together, committing crimes, riding mounts, casting on your opponent's turns, you name it. I especially love the blue-white deck, but every color pair has tons of deep and satisfying build-around. It's a format that rewards careful planning and deck building, but is also just fast enough and just enough prone to disruption that you'll always need to change those plans along the way, just like a good heist narrative. Plus, those breaking news reprints are pretty cool, and pulling off a win with something like Mindslaver is like nothing else. Number 6, March of the Machine. This might be a huge surprise to people who saw my video on the online story, but I actually think March of the Machine is kind of awesome by both metrics I'm measuring. Sure, I don't like how the written story panned out, but in terms of the collage-based storytelling on the actual cards, which will definitely leave more of an impact, there's so much great stuff to be found. From the characters getting corrupted and transformed by the Phyrexians, to the heroes and artifacts that turn the tide of battles, to mortal enemies fighting side by side against a greater evil, to the look at how the invasion is affecting the furthest corners of the multiverse, it's every bit as epic as it needs to be. Yeah, it probably should have been stretched to 2 sets, but that leaves this one set with a ton to chew on. That's true for the gameplay too. If I'm not mistaken, this set has more double-faced cards than any set ever, and they transform in completely different ways. Battles in particular are brilliant. They form a great risk-reward dynamic, and in Limited they're very well balanced, especially for a brand new card type. Convoke is also something we should see way more often. At a macro level, there's a ton of overlap between archetypes, and the legend reprints can be awesome to pull. Yeah, there are a lot of powerful rares, but that's the thing, there are a lot of them. With those bonus sheet legends, I feel like I got at least one bomb rare almost every draft, so it's less of a feel bad when your opponent draws them. And let's be real, most of them are still way less oppressive and way more flavorful than a lot of the ones in Crimson Vow. March of the Machine may not be perfect, but it sure is big, and it's just well tuned enough to hold itself together and then some. Number 5, The Brothers' War. I am not remotely a Magic oldhead. New Phyrexia is ancient history to me, and yet I still recognize that the old Magic story is unmatched, at least when it comes to character-driven conflict. I haven't made the deep dive into the books or anything, but this set earns a 10 out of 10 flavor on the cards alone. A couple other sets later on this list come very close, but I have to give the Brothers' War the edge just because there's a humanity to it that I hardly see anywhere else in Magic. From the fracturing of Urza and Mishra's relationship, to the dust and grit of the battlefield, to the industrial horror of the Phyrexian construct, this set conveys so much in a collage-like medium. It's a very strong set mechanically too, with near-perfect color balance, fun build-arounds, and lots of interesting artifact reprints. Unfortunately though, the most unique thing about it, the Power Stones and Artifact ramp, are a little weak due to the format being on the faster side. If they were better balanced, this set would make the top 3. But for now, it'll settle for top 5. Number 4, Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Okay, I really have no excuse, I'm just gonna say it. The Cave Dino set is peak, or I guess the opposite of peak.
Get it? Because it's set underground. Yeah, anyway.
Actually, I do have excuses. Yes, the set has one too many cheap flyers, but it also has some reach and life gain. If you can survive the goddamn bats, this set is such a treat. The graveyard and artifact themes bleed through all the archetypes, giving the whole set a ton of cohesion. Descend, explore, and craft all synergize so well with each other, and flipping through your deck with Discover feels so good every time. And the art direction, god damn, probably my favorite on this entire list. The primal might of the dinosaurs, the wonder of the Cosmium artifacts, the whole new worlds underground, the lost gods, everything is brought to life so incredibly. I also appreciate how it takes clear inspiration from a real-world culture without just being a cheap theme park version of what we recognize. I'm not sure how much of this is deep-cut Native American mythology and how much is pure modern creativity. If you're knowledgeable about this, feel free to share. All I can say is hats off to the creative team for making something truly awe-inspiring. Number 3, Strixhaven. This set is so excellent in so many ways. First, the archetypes are incredibly original, especially for their color pair. That's particularly true for the Red-White Lorehold, which is a slow graveyard deck that, while not as strong on average as some of the others, feels so good when you put it together. On top of that, while the archetypes are very well defined and synergistic, they're never on rails, due to lots of hybrid mana cards, all the mechanics being shared between factions, and colorless lessons that are available to everyone. And about those lessons, talk about a mechanic that was probably a big risk, but now seems like a no-brainer in hindsight. They provide a real notable increase in player agency during the game, and they're perfectly on flavor for a Magic School set. And speaking of the school setting, that's also packed with style and charm. Each of the 5 colleges has a unique look and vibe, distinct from both other Magic factions in places like Ravnica, and, you know, that other Magic School. Also, unlike that other Magic School, this set does a great job showing hints of the world outside the school grounds. The school is still the focus, but that's a good thing. It leaves the wider world with a sense of mystery and wonder, and I'm really excited to go back there in the future. Number 2, Duskmourn. Just like with New Capenna, I was unbelievably hyped on hearing the concept for this set. They're making the Backrooms as a Magic plane? That was awesome, but I thought there was no way it could live up to my expectations. Especially not after what happened with New Capenna. But then the set came out, and guess what? It actually did. This set is so good. The mechanics are completely intuitive, the archetypes are easy to grasp, and yet they are endlessly fluid from draft to draft. Every style can be powerful, from aggro to sacrifice to graveyard to slow enchantment control, and so much more. Looking at the previews going in, I thought black might be way too weak, which would be off for a horror set, but it's totally not, and even now the meta seems to be shifting as much as the walls of the house itself. And yeah, that setting, it's amazing. Some people are calling it too derivative or mundane, but I don't buy that at all. It may take inspiration from the Backrooms and Stranger Things, but only in a very broad sense, and the Backrooms in particular are just ripe for original ideas as a concept. Duskmourn capitalizes on that perfectly, offering a treasure trove of creepy locales and denizens at varying levels of hostility. It offers the perfect mix of horror and adventurous thrill, and if there's any Magic setting I'm most tempted to run a TTRPG campaign in, it's this one. My only real complaint is that some of the survivors don't look beaten or scared enough, there are a few too many smiles, but that's not much of a problem when you know just what horrors of the house might lurk around each corner. It's not the goriest thing ever, but it's plenty creepy. The art, and especially the flavor text for the monsters, does not let up. And to cap off both mechanics and flavor, Manifest Dread is a perfect mechanic for a horror setting that puts the last attempt at face-down cards to absolute shame. This set is nearly perfect to play, but I guess nearly is the operative word there. Number 1, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. This set shouldn't even be real. It might be the most ambitious set they've ever made in my time as a player, and somehow all that ambition paid off. Everything about this set soars. I just praised some other sets for versatile card designs and overlapping archetypes, but Neon Dynasty makes those look like core sets by comparison. If you want, you can pick a basic archetype like Samurai or Vehicles and draft what looks good at first glance. You can win like that, even get 7 wins if you're lucky, but read between the lines of almost any card and you'll see an ocean of possible synergies and counterplay. Look at something as innocuous as Searchlight Companion. Just a 3-mana 1/1 flyer that makes a 1/1 token. It counts as an artifact, gives you an extra body to sacrifice and crew vehicles, it can evade to trigger ninjutsu, it gives you an extra body when it comes back after ninjutsu, it's a good modification target, it gives you 2 blockers against the Exalted Samurai, and I'm sure there's more. And that's just for one incredibly simple creature that doesn't use any of the set's mechanics. I won't even get started on some of the others. What might make Neon Dynasty shine brightest of all is not only the incredibly deep deck building synergy, but that during a game you'll always have multiple options and are almost always able to interact with your opponent's game plan. The Exalted Samurai and reconfigured equipment can lead to devastating attacks, but they need a few cards to set up. Removal of all kinds is plentiful, but the format has so many 2-for-1s that it has to be very well placed in order to even carry its weight. The massive number of sagas provide constant tempo and board state progression, but they also constantly warn your opponents about what's coming next. All of this results in the most dynamic and engaging limited format I've ever seen, and the only one I'm comfortable giving a 10 out of 10 for mechanics. And you know what? I was tempted to give it a 10 out of 10 flavor too. After flirting with sci-fi elements in previous sets, Neon Dynasty gave us a full-on cyberpunk fantasy hybrid setting and made it look effortless. The bright, shiny art style of modern Magic isn't the best fit for every setting, but it's perfect for the neon cities and ancient gardens of modern Kamigawa. On top of that, there's tons of alternate art by Japanese artists that looks incredible, I wish I owned more of these cards, and the set even has a soundtrack that kinda slaps. There's a cut called The Future is Bright that's actually one of my favorite EDM songs now.
It's also the song you're listening to right now. Also, forgot to mention that New Capenna also has a soundtrack, and that one's pretty good too.
The flavor in this set is very well integrated with the mechanics too. Ninjas need to be sneaky with well-timed attacks, the human artifact creatures highlight the use of cybernetics, and the colors lean toward either the new ways or the old based on whether they interact more with artifacts or enchantments. That said, I do have one hiccup. The only thing that really stopped me from giving it a 10 out of 10 in both metrics is that the spirits really should have been enchantment creatures. You're telling me some ninja with a magical hacking device gets to count as an enchantment, but the living embodiment of transience doesn't? I mean, come on. But that is just a nitpick, and it does almost nothing to take away from what is, without a doubt, the greatest Magic limited format I have ever played. And yeah, that's all the sets. Please feel free to share any of your thoughts in the comments. The point of this was to start a conversation after all. Did I overrate or underrate any set? Are there any older sets that deserve special mention? And are there any upcoming sets that you're especially excited for? All I can say is, despite the misstep at Karlov Manor, the last few sets like Lost Caverns of Ixalan, Thunder Junction, and especially Duskmourn leave me optimistic about the future of Limited. So cheers to good drafts going forward. I'm out.